you doing, everyone? This part right here is going to be over magical justice, and this talks about guess magical forms of justice as opposed to laws and stuff like that. Kind of hard to explain off the bat, but we'll get the idea as we go along. Okay, so the first beginning pictures is a scale with nothing on it. And of course, it's way down on one side with a serpent. And then on the next one, way down the other side by a, looks to be a chicken or a rooster. And of course, on the last page, let's see, where is it? Well, they didn't put one on this one. I don't think it had, I don't think this is kind of an odd one, that is. But let's see, codes with fortune, wheels, and mediators. We'll get the idea as we go along. Nice little picture right here. The code, just briefly looking at this, it talks about the natural laws and stuff like that, and how people rise up from their lower status and stuff like that when they do good deeds. But let's take a look here. The Prodigal Mill. Wonderful John Howe picture. Let's see here. There we go. A Danish king, proud possessor of a set of magic millstones, grew despondent when he could not unlock their powers. He found a way to make the wheels turn. He could grind out endless supplies of gold and fortune. These kind of, this is a magical item here that, as it said, it can give him anything he wants. But the problem is it's too big for him to use it. So he goes to some other guy who gives him two giantesses, two female giants, and they were big and strong enough to, turn everything. But as it goes, here they are turning the mill, and a bunch of soldiers on the ground. So what gives? Well, let me turn back here and read the caption. Weary of milling wealth and well-being for their heartless master, the giantesses Minia and Phinia decided to grind out something different. Weapons, soldiers, and warships to equip his lifelong enemy. Because I think the giantesses were given to him by his enemy. And in the end, here they are, still grinding the mill. With no lord to command them otherwise, Minia and Phinia continued work even when the millstones sank in the bottom of the sea, endlessly turning. They ground out the salt that filled the world's oceans. So, yep, one example there. Very haunting picture here. A woman asleep with her child, but there's an arm, against her. A young queen was found besmeared with the blood of her infant who had vanished. The deed was the work of mysterious crones settling an old score. Harsh payment in kind, says the other page. Excuse me. This may look familiar to a lot of people with who are familiar with old fairy tales. The king of beasts returns a favor. In a world where every tree might harbor a nymph, the smallest act of cruelty to another living thing could occur in a savage vengeance. The simplest kindness, or on the other hand, could win unforeseen rewards. Sages cited the salutary tale of Androcles, a slave who showed bloodthirsty Rome the value of compassion. It happened so. Let's see. No longer able to bear his brutal master's thrashings, Androcles one day slipped his chains and escaped. He sprinted through the streets of Rome, out of the city's great gate, across the surrounding field, and on into the forest. At last he collapsed exhausted at the mouth of the cave. When he sat up, Androcles was horrified to see a massive lion emerging from the cavern. The animal slowly approached him, then placed a huge, bleeding paw on his lap. Protruding from the matted fur was a jagged thorn. A sudden flood of pity for the animal drowned the slave's fear. Firmly grasping the wounded paw, he drew out the barb and showed it to the lion. Of course, the beast turned and walked away. After wandering far and enduring many hardships, Androcles was recaptured and returned to Rome. The punishment he faced for his attempted escape was to fight unarmed with a starving lion in Rome's palace of bloodshed, the arena. From his cell under the stands, Androcles could hear the roars of a hungry beast in her pen. Then the guard thrust out before the chanting crowd to meet his executioner. But through some extraordinary quirk of fate, the lion was the very same animal that Androcles had attended in the cave. Though maddened with hunger, the great cat recognized his gentle friend and lay down at his feet like a dog. The crowd was shocked into silence, challenged to explain his magic. The slave told his tale, moving the emperor to set him free. And of course, this one looks like in Japan. A bunch of workers in the field, but one particular one is wearing a wooden bowl on her head. The dutiful daughter. Let's see. Obedient to her mother's dying wish, a Japanese peasant girl covered her head with a wooden bowl to shield her beauty from the gaze of lustful men. And of course, let's get a good close-up of that. A rich young farmer, undeterred by his friend's mockery, married the penniless girl whose face he has never seen. On their wedding day, the bowl broke of its own accord, bringing an unexpected dowry. Chapter here says the water of hell and heaven. Now, this is a very unusual picture. It looks like sort of a rough drawing. It's intriguing nonetheless. Let's see. Here we go. At a market in Old Jerusalem, a scholar purchased a jar that concealed a frog, but the creature proved to be no ordinary amphibian, and it repaid its owner's kindness with gifts of occult knowledge. And this has no capture in it, it's just a painting of a boar. Probably has something to do with the story I just read there in the text, of course. And then we got a two-pager here. A man there, let's see, on the ground here, a woman attending to him. Caption reads, after the scholar was slain by an unknown assailant, his lips were moistened with water brought from heaven. The awestruck crowd waited to see if his divine liquor would restore his life. Of course, again, captions don't necessarily tell the whole story. It tells the rest of the story, or gives you a very cryptic part. That's where you read the text from it. An artful ally. A bunch of people, about 4 people, one guy at the end of a rainbow, and a fox standing on 2 legs. What gives? Excuse me. Assisted by a fox whose life he had spared, a poor man disguised himself as a nobleman and gained a bride and a fortune. To deceive the eyes of his beholders, he wore a coat of flowers, cunningly crafted by his 4-legged friend. Kind of like an odd version of Puss in Boots there. Our classical looking dragon here. Right next to the fox. And there we go. By a cruel deception, the fox caused the dragon's death and appropriated its lands and castle for his master's use. Again, very similar to Puss in Boots and what he did for his master. Okay. A pharaoh-looking man there, got claws on his feet and so forth. But let's see what it's talking about. Purgation in the wilderness. The early Hebrew sages told how a hard lesson in the virtues of the humility was learned by one of the mightiest kings of ancient Babylon. This monarch had transformed his capital into the queen of cities by adorning it with splendid temples, ziggurats, and gardens. He never stopped boasting about his work. One night he had a strange and alarming dream. In it he stood beside a towering tree whose tops touched the sky. Birds nestled in the branches and animals sheltered down below. Suddenly a messenger from heaven appeared and ordered that the king be cut down and the proud king exiled from the society of humans to live like an ox in the fields. Upon awakening, the king recounted a vision to his master magicians. This venerated interpreter of dreams warned that it was the king himself who would be felled and exiled if he did not turn to act more humbly. A year passed, and the king duly forgot the prophecy. One day, as he strutted about his palace, basking in the flattery of the court nobles, a volley of thunder shook the skies, and the king heard what seemed to him to be a voice announcing that his reign was over. It drove him mad. The monarch no longer knew where or what he was. He rushed out of the field, where he went on all fours like a wild beast, chewing the grass and bellowing at passerbys. Drenched by dew and dirtied by mud, the king's hair grew long and matted. His hands and feet were torn by stones and thorns. After 7 months in his bestial existence, the monarch finally understood the error of his former ways. Repentant, he stood upright and staggered home. Weeping tears of joy, relief, and shame, he found his throne still waiting. But he was a different man than the arrogant monarch who had left it, and proved it by ruling with greater wisdom and humility. Raiment beyond compare. Let's see what I have. Interesting pictures here. Get a little close up, read the caption. 2 craftsmen promised a vainglorious emperor clothing of unparalleled magnificence, but invisible to fools and traitors. The chamberlain sent by the emperor to inspect the work was loud and lavished in his private praises. The old cloth maker and the emperor deal. And of course, there he is. Underneath the shading here. Proud of garments so fine that only loyal subjects could see them, the emperor displayed them in the possession of great pomp and ceremony. The emperor's got no clothes on. That's that old fairy tale. Beggar's bride. There. See a woman whose pottery she was selling got smashed by this one upstart nobleman. When a drunken hussar shattered the pots at her stall, the market trader's meager livelihood was ruined. Unbeknown to the crowd, she was once proud princess, forced into marriage with a mendicant of learned humility. I've seen a cartoon of this story once. From Toei, reproducing the old Grimm's fairy tales. Very good watch if you ever have a chance to see. A Quest of Expiation. And this is one of those weird books that they tell, instead of having multiple stories all tied in together, they kind of, have it sectioned off at a time, almost like 2 pages. Trees Perpetual Penance. I don't know if I want to get into the story, but, I'll show the illustration of a bird. So we're going to move on here. A Perilous Courtship. And again, I'm pretty much going to skip this one as well. See some Asian drawings here, China in particular. See a guy walking past a lion and a tiger here. Apparently he's confronted by a ghost. And there's also a beautiful woman in the background by the window, right here. And he's trying to change, but chased by a bunch of ravaging monkeys. Don't know if they're actual monkeys or they're just evil spirits. I never read this story. I remember the pictures though. And this is where it gets a little gruesome. Beating the snakes out of them. Here's a man and a woman running away from a flying sword being shot at them. Chapter 2, The Fortune's Wheel. It's an interesting form of classical art. Or, I don't know if it's that classic, but very good fantasy piece. Pairing the Forces of Fate. Let's see. 3 handmaidens of fate spoke a prophecy over the newborn infant's head, promising this peasant's child the king's daughter as a bride. Witnessing this scene by chance, the displeased monarch set out to defy the decree of fate. 3 handmaidens of fate. You find that a lot in mythology. Everything from Greek mythology to, up to the Sandman, where he borrowed it from. Let's see. The king put the infant in a river, expecting that he would drown, but the baby floated downstream into the loving hands of foster parents who raised him into, to manhood. It's very macabre art when you look at it. Sent on a perilous mission to steal 3 hairs from the Sun King's head, the hero was assisted by the mother of the Solar Lord, who plucked the strands from her son's head as he slept. Hooded man on a crowned king on a boat. As a punishment for seeking to defy destiny, the old king was tricked into perpetual servitude as a ferryman on an enchanted lake. Beloved of the gods. The butterfly on here. Let's see if there's anything else. A big older man with a goblet. When the Irish fairy Lord Midhere the Proud fell in love with a beautiful maiden, his jealous wife turned her rival into a butterfly. Buffeted by storms, the creature alighted on the goblet's rim and was accidentally swallowed. Oh, there's a butterfly right there. The warrior king who scorned a goddess. Let's see. Half divine and half human, the Mesopotamian hero Gilgamesh excited the amorous interest of Ishtar, goddess of love and war. But when he resisted all her blandishments, her anger was aroused as well. Love and war, boy. That would be very stressful in a relationship. This one. Yeah, a woman on fire, but also surrounded by roses, and a man being levitated above it. A slanderer undone. The unwanted attention of lustful mortals could be just as dangerous as the amorous longings of the gods. So it happened when the ancient Palestine, a woman named Zillah, suffered at the hands of Hamal, her lustrous neighbor. Hamal was a merchant, rich enough to purchase anything he desired. On land, his caravan flowed ceaselessly along the desert trade routes of Africa and Asia, ferrying wheat and amber, precious metals, silks, and spices. At sea, his fleet of cargo ships dominated western commerce, taking tin from the blue-painted Britons, bringing slaves to the marts of Athens and Alexandria. But all his revenues and profits could not entice Zillah to his bed. Honey persuasions and veiled threats were equally fruitless. Losing patience, Hamal warned that if Zillah rejected him once more, he would accuse her publicly of prostitution and licentious acts. This was no empty threat. In that stern country, such crimes were punishable by death, and a man's word weighed more than a woman's. Yet Zillah spurned him once again. Hamal denounced her to the authorities, and her denials counted for nothing. Zillah was condemned to be burned at the stake in a marketplace in her accuser's presence. It is written that when the wood was ignited, a great tongue of flame lashed out and consumed Hamal where he stood, and the glowing coals of Zillah's feet turned to roses. Some chronicles propose that this was the work of a guardian spirit coming to the aid of the injured innocent, but others claim that Zillah's own anger at the outrage drew forth a fire out of heaven and struck her false accuser down. Oh, got his just desserts. Got a headless bull being thrown by the tail by a great man. Ishtar dispatched a bull of heaven to punish Gilgamesh for his indifference, but the intended victim and his friend Indiku slew the monster and flung his hide skyward as a gesture of contempt. Let's see what we got here. There we go. Failing to injure Gilgamesh by other means, the goddess sent an illness that killed his beloved comrade Enkidu. She had savage satisfaction from the loss blighted Gilgamesh's life forever. The Wrath of Artemis. I got an arrow flying by, but there is a caption down below. Let me see. Read this here. To punish the Greek general Agamemnon for inadvertently killing a sacred stag, the goddess Artemis sent a plague that decimated his forces and stilled the winds to keep his warships in port. Of course, without such a things, we're talking about the Aeneid. I'm sorry, the Iliad of Virgil, of Homer. We're getting too confused. But here, by the way, there's a skeleton on top there. Keep everything at port. No caption here. A bunch of people being slain of some kind, two with arrows in them. Cruel replay of a mortal's boast. More Greek myths. Maybe next page may tell. Maybe not. Nope. Just go to the next story. Following the trail of corruption. It is in the old city of Benares. A boy offered his service as a thief catcher to the rich but miserly king. The youth possessed a magic talisman that enabled him to see footsteps on the ground and to know who made them. Very nice 2-pager right here across the top of the cities. To test their servants' mettle, the monarch and his vizier burgled their own treasury and left an intricate trail of invisible footsteps for the boy to find. So they stole their own stuff. Well-intentioned blunder. I'll go ahead and read this one. An old Chinese tale recalled the beginning of time when the heavenly emperor ruled from his throne among the stars and people labored endlessly in the fields of earth. As he looked down, the heavenly emperor was saddened by how hard his subjects worked and how terribly hungry they were. So he resolved to provide them with enough to eat. He determined that food once every 3 days should be sufficient. Happy with his magnanimity, he called upon one of his minions, the Star Ox, to go down and announce the new order. How the Star Ox got down to Earth, or what the men and women who saw the celestial beast's arrival thought of it, is not recorded. Nor is there any record of the feelings of the starving people when that splendid ox made his announcement. What he passed down was the heavenly emperor's reaction to the ox's words. The ox had garbled a message in the telling, promising 3 meals each day instead of 1 meal every 3 days. The emperor was furious. His proclamation, whether delivered by a stupid underling or by his own August self, were immutable as stone, as inevitable as the monsoon. Although there was no way that people could produce enough food to fill their cooking pots and ceramic bowls 3 times a day, the heavenly emperor was bound by his word, and as it was spoken by his messenger. Since the ox had made the error, the heavenly emperor decreed that he would have to correct it throughout eternity by living on earth and plowing the soil. It was not the ox's fault that he had gotten the message wrong, but it was a law of heaven that the emperor had to provide what he had promised in his name, and the necessity of keeping strictly to the order of things rebounded to the benefit of all humankind. Wanderers on the road without end. Again, I'll skip this one, but it's got some great border art, as you can see. And of course, once you go through this, some of you may recognize the story. If you ever read this, you'll recognize it as a very shortened version of the Rime of the Old Mariner. It's got some fantastic, shows the fantastic Gustave Doré art that he's drawn for this. Albatross being shot by an arrow. Gosh, I always loved Gustave Doré. Sorry, I'm not speaking much. I don't put much captions. There's got the main text here, which doesn't look like much, but I only got so much room on my camera. You know what? Let's go ahead and read this one. It can't be that much longer, can it? No, it's got one more page right here, so let's go back a bit. Wanders on a road without end. Throughout all the old kingdom of Europe and Asia Minor, ordinarily folk whispered of the eerie encounters with a man who walked the earth as punishment for a terrible crime. The peace of death was forever denied him. So, too, the solace of oblivion. This wanderer had many different names and guises, and the tales told about him were as numberless as the footsteps of his journey. Some accounts painted him as a vagabond with a pack on his back. He might be found joustling among the polyglots crowds of the busy metropolis, brooding on lonely mountainsides, standing at the crossroads where suicides were buried, or slowly picking his way across rubble-strewn beaches where the bones of fallen seabirds lay bleaching in the sun. Poets and sages could not agree if all the sightings recorded from the Caucasus to the cloudy coast of Flanders were the same miserable sinner. Some speculate that there were a number of these wretched wraiths crossing the world, oblivious to one another as they paced out and measured the eternity. Each one expiated different crimes or fled a different nemesis. The earliest of all known fugitives was a man who slew his own brother at the beginning of time. The Hebrew Chronicles called him Cain. He was at first a farmer who loved the land and tilled, but for bringing the sin of murder into the world, he was condemned to walk the earth undying, with a blazon of shame on his forehead. It was said that he longed to work the soil again, but if ever he tried to settle down and follow his old occupation, the ground touched by his plow became barren forever. The Arab sages spoke of a similar punishment meted out by a metal worker named Al-Samari. Indeed, they said this was the very person who had sculpted a golden calf that tempted the children of Israel to worship false gods at the foot of Sinai, while their leader Moses went up to receive the tablets of the law. Driven away by Moses' wrath, Al-Samari became an eternal outcast. In Europe, those, and there were many, who encountered a deathless stranger on a forest path or among the shadows of the burial ground knew him variously as Joseph, Cardophilus, Ahasuerus, or most strangely as Butadius, which is an old Mediterranean dialect meant the god-beater. According to some accounts, he had been a shoemaker in Jerusalem, or perhaps a Roman soldier who struck Jesus an angry blow as he carried a cross to Calvary. Some insisted that the traveler had been on a march eons before the crucifixion. In every legend, the wanderer's crimes was a monstrous one that offended both humanity and heaven. He paid for it by covering every inch of the earth's surface, pausing only to tell passerby the reason of his fate. To ensure that his tale was heard and understood, he had the gift of languages. Whenever in the world it appeared, he spoke the local dialect as fluently as if it were his mother tongue. He visited every land so often, he had ample time to learn its idiom. Once a traveler chanced to meet him in the deep forest of the Argot, Brittany's dark hinterland. He strolled for a while together in the shades of oaks so tall that blotted out the sun. The hoary stranger told his companions that he remembered walking in the self-same place when it was an open field of grain, with a few scattered acorns crackling underfoot. Another time, the itinerant Swiss peddler reported that he had chanced upon an old Ahasuerus crossing the desolate Alpine pass. The ancient, gazing up at the barren peak of the Matterhorn, remarked that on a previous visit there had been no mountain on that spot at all, but a thriving city now vanished without trace. It was a wonder that a poet once called him, Father Time's younger brother. Perhaps because he lived outside the confines of hourglass and calendar, he was able to view past and future simultaneously. It was often said that he had the gift of second sight. He could warn of impending death, bring news of good fortune, or divine the hiding place of buried treasure, but he could not, nor would not, turn his talent into a personal advantage. According to some witnesses, he begged for such money as he needed. Others maintained that his sack he carried on his back contained a fixed number of coins. If he spent one, another appeared by magic in his place. At one of the great trade fairs held at Frankfurt, a merchant claimed to have sold the deathless vagabond a second-hand coat. The old man paid him with a gold piece minted in Rome 1,000 years before and marked with a seal of the emperor whose very name had been forgotten. Other stories said the traveler was a seafarer who sailed a watery waste in a galleon crewed by corpses. Like his landlocked counterpart, this wanderer sometimes came ashore to tell the tale of crime, shame, and punishment, but often his sentence was served out on the ocean. During the dark hours of dog watch, sailors quailed to see his phantom craft slipping out of the sudden fog. He knew and dreaded it. It was a mere skeleton of a ship, a broken-ribbed hulk, rotten timbers and tattered sails. Dutch mariners sometimes encountered a blighted soul named Reginald of Falkenberg, once lord of mighty castle that guarded the Netherlandish coast. His misfortune was to love a lady who his brother loved as well. His crime was to murder both of them when they made him favored his sibling. Reginald fell upon his hapless pair and slew them as they lay in each other's arms on their wedding night in a desperate struggle. Reginald's forehead was marked forever with his brother's bloody handprint. Appalled at the length of which the green-eyed, god of jealousy had driven him, Reginald fled, to the holy. The holy hermit in a forest and asked to be shriven. The recluse declared that absolution was impossible. Fratricide was the crime of Cain, and like Cain, Reginald became a wanderer. Although he escaped the justice of the earthly courts, he found himself at the mercy of a darker, more ominous judiciary. The story does not say if those who sentenced Reginald came from heaven, hell, or from some netherworld of howling ghosts, but he was apprehended by spirits and condemned to spend eternity aboard a North Sea sailing ship. No helmsman steered a craft through the maze of islands and dangerous sandbars off the Frisian coast. No sailors climbed the rigging, but he was not the only passenger. Two cloaked specters, one black and one white, played an endless game of dice for Falkenberg's soul. For hundreds of years, watcher on the shore spied his grisly ship crossing and recrossing that same old bloody body of water. Then abruptly the sighting ceased. It may have been that the hapless murderer was finally paroled into the custody of death, or possibly his craft was anchored at last at the harbor of hell. An English poet sang of a gnarled and haggard sailor who came ashore with a chilling tale to tell. The bed-wrangled stranger had a glittering eye which hypnotized his hearer into a narrative until the narrative was done. In this instance, the reluctant audience was a young man bound for a wedding feast. With a skeletal hand, the wanderer parted the youth from his fellow guests and, deaf to all protestations, launched into the strange confession. He told of a sailing ship forced off course by a terrible storm. Winds of unimaginable power drove the vessel steadily southward until it reached the drifting ice floes of the Antarctic Ocean. The crew were terrified by the absence of any sign of life. No seagulls were above the mast. No fish leaped into the frigid waters. The only sound were the creaking of the ice and the wind and wailed over it. Glittering icebergs moved to surround the ship, and a thick blanket of fog dropped over it. Suddenly, a bird flew out of the mist, white as winter and with a vast wingspan. The albatross circled the craft and then perched atop the mast. Moments later, the sky cleared and the ice broke up. The vessel was free again. As the voyagers sailed northward into warmer waters, the albatross stayed with them, flying in their wake. The crew members, like all sailors, were superstitious. Some claimed the great bird had brought the fog. Others said the creature was a benign spirit who had come to rescue them. The argument was resolved when one impulsive sailor took his crossbow and shot the bird. Its corpse fell with a thud upon the deck, and at once the winds died. The ship was becalmed. The sailors blamed the bowman and hung the albatross's body around the neck of a broken as a token of shame. The frayed rations ran out. Hopes of rescue rose when the foreign craft hove into view, and few again were the sailors saw it was once a ghost ship, with two ghoulish figures playing dice on the empty deck. One by one, through thirst, disease, and despair, the members of the crew began to die. As each seaman breathed his last, he turned a baleful eye upon his comrades, whose wanton act of violence upon the bird had brought down punishment on all their heads. Soon, only the man who had shot the albatross was left alive on the ship. He knew now, beyond any possible doubt, that it was no ordinary avian blood that he had shed. If the bird was not itself a god, it was at very least a celestial messenger. Avoiding the reproachful great gaze of the staring corpses, the mariner waited for his own death and nourished himself on guilt and misery. Half delirious, he contemplated the wonders of this unknown part of the ocean. Even in the wretchedness, he was moved by a strange beauty of a school of multicolored sea serpents, disporting in the clear waters. Unaccountably, the vision filled him with joy, and he blessed the water snakes as creatures of heaven. At that moment, the leaden weight of the albatross fell from its neck. The knots tied by the hands of the now dead shipmates eased and loosened, and the feathered carcass slipped away from his body and dropped to the sea. But his strange adventures were only just beginning. A troop of spirits took possession of the dead crewmen's corpses. Rising up, the unsouled bodies set to work. The sail suddenly billowed out with a wind that must have come from another world, and the ship moved on with no apparent earthly navigator. The vessel traveled through uncharted seas and carried a lone sailor, entranced and terrified, safely back at the coastal waters of his native land. When the ship was finally sighted, the pilot boat emerged from the harbor in order to guide it safely back to port. Let's see. As the smaller boat approached, the pilot and his companions perceived something uncanny. The complete silence on board the vessel, the apparent absence of his crew, an aura of doom that almost made them turn around and now on the opposite direction for all their lives were worth. But before the pilot could either flee or come any closer, the great turbulence, cleaved the waters at the bay. A whirlpool sucked the death ship down. The doomed craft sank without affording the pilot a single glimpse of its grisly crew. Only the shocked but still living body of the sailor who had killed the albatross was found floating on the water. When he was rescued and brought ashore, he could not rest until he had told his story in lavish and meticulous detail, not once but 1,000 times. There was no rest for him. He roamed the earth in search for new listeners. Whoever heard him was shaken from his careless complacency and transformed forever into a sadder and wiser soul. Thus, perhaps, did the mariner expiate the crime of destroying something that he did not understand. So here we go. The Mediators. This is chapter 3. And let's see. Oh, nice picture here. Somebody helping somebody out of thorn branches and stuff like that. Very strange. Celestial usurper. An arrogant Sicilian king was punished for his pride by an angel who assumed a monarch's face and figure and usurped his throne. The members of the royal court never noticed the difference. Of course, more to the story here. It seems to involve a monkey and the jester in some form of cell. And here's an odd one. You got an old man sitting behind a rock, and from his hair, a cow is eating. Evil loosed upon the world. So it's the title up here. I never knew what this story was about. But that's only brought us page, a futile flight of retribution. And not too much pictures there. Oh, here we go. Very haunting one. Somebody being followed by some evil spirits in the sky. Guilty of matricide, the Greek warrior Alcmaeon was hounded by the Furies, avenging spirits from the bowels of hell. Their intervention and his own duplicity led him into a fatal trap. In his death agonies, their triumph shrieks rang in his ears until the darkness swallowed him. Summons at the hour of doom. See a crow here with a... I don't know if that's supposed to be a large crow or just in the foreground. But knowing this could be either one. Enchanted Snare, the Envious. Let's see. 4 Chinese sister-in-laws, 3 highborn and 1 peasant wed above her station, exchanged gifts of tea, mocked by her wealthy kinswomen for offering commonplace green tea instead of a rare ginseng or precious pico. The 4th woman soon revealed that she had magic powers far beyond their comprehension. See the 3 of them looking upon a box with some buildings in it. When the time came for New Year's Eve's giving, the humble bride astounded her husband's family by producing a mysterious coffer. Its battered exterior concealed a populous miniature city, filled with theaters, taverns, pleasure gardens, and menageries. That'd be quite impressive, fit it all in a box like that. And here, those who did not stop, Those who did not stop at murder to obtain the wonderful box learned their captured prize came complete with an unexpected punishment. Justice done, the coffer turned once more into a battered chest, mere flotsam drifting down the yellow river toward the sea. A discriminating distillation. So you got a couple characters here. Pink skin and pot-bellied Sojos were the servants of the great sea dragon who ruled the waters around Japan. They were found on the rice wine brewed by the gods and cheerfully shared with their sea-mortals. To virtuous humans, the drink was nectar; to the wicked, a foul-tasting poison. A cold light of justice. This is all... I don't think I'll skip this one after already reading the Mariner story. But if you are interested, you can always pick one up on Amazon. A bit party here. Stranger at the revels. Reveling the night away at a wedding, the villagers of Stanton Drew never imagined that their righteous festivities would end in horror. And here is why. See a bunch of people stressfully still dancing around, tired and, trying to keep on, but, by this character. A wheeling music casts a spell and forces dancers into a reel and that never ended. Ignoring their pleas for a rest, the demonic piper played on. I think I'll go ahead and read this story here. See a couple women here. One pretty, the other one with more angry eyes. In a world dominated by dark forces, the Lord of magical justice slipped to consoling image of an orderly universe. Many tales took on their subjects a pair of siblings, one good, one bad, who underwent a sequence of identical moral tests. The divergent ends of their parallel adventures displayed a pleasing and edifying symmetry. The Old Norse storytellers knew many variations of this theme. In one, the eternal duality was expressed by a pair of stepscissors. Of the two young women, one was sweet-tempered and industrious. The other, who could do no wrong in her mother's eyes, was indolent and spiteful. On a summer day, warm enough to work outdoors, the two sat with their distaffs by the well. To pass the time, they agreed to have spinning contests. The one whose thread broke first would have to go down the shaft as a penalty. Favoring her natural daughter, as always, the mother made sure that the unhandy girl had good flax to spin, while her nimble-fingered stepdaughter was given nothing but coarse bristles. Sure enough, it was not long before the girl's threads broke. Despite all her skill, bravely she carried out her part of the bargain by climbing down the well shaft. But it proved to be no ordinary well. It was, said the storytellers, a conduit to another. Let's see. To another world altogether. When the girl stopped climbing, she found herself unheard in a land of mountains and meadows as she set off to explore the unknown country, and soon discovered the alien nature that lay beneath it, apparently ordinary landscape. First, she found her path barred by a hedge that spoke aloud, begging her to pass carefully without damaging its foliage. Shocked but compliant, she slipped by, hardly disturbing a twig, the grateful hedge promising to help her if she should ever need it. Next, she met a bridled cow with a milking pail hung by its horns. To her amazement, the cow asked her in human speech to milk it, which she willingly did. She drank from the milk at the cow's invitation, but only enough to slake her thirst. When she went on her way, she drew a great sheep choking with heat under its thick-coated wool. It was urgent request. She quickly and neatly sheared off the fleece with the clippers that hung from its horn. She had not gone much further when a laden apple tree pleaded to be relieved with the weight of its fruit. With a slender pole she found leaning against the tree, she carefully tapped down all the apples she could not reach. She could not reach. After eating a few, as the tree suggested, she laid the rest neatly at its foot. Eventually, she came to a large farm, where she turned in to ask for work to earn her keep. The house belonged to an old witch whose crabbed features and ominous mien marked her as a member of a tribe of trolls. The witch set her a trio a test to fetch water in a sieve, to clean out a byre as big as a meadow, and finally to wash the black fleece white. Failure, she implied, would bring a punishment far too terrible to mention. The way sort of justice was a talking ring. But if the witch brandished a sinister power, the heroine also found her own occult resources. Some swallows, honored in the old world as birds of luck and virtue, helped her to achieve her impossible task, putting clay into the sieve, sweeping with a magic broom, dripping the fleece in a butt of water that held enchantment. To serve as payment for her work, the hag grudgingly offered her the choice of one of three caskets. The hovering birds made it plain enough, their liquid notes, that this offer was not as straightforward as it seems, and indicated which coffer the girl should choose. She seized the plainest of the three and fled, the witch in pursuit intended to kill her and reclaim the casket. But the creatures who she had assisted earlier, the talking hedge, the cow, the sheep, and the tree, each in turn supplied a hiding place. Again, justice. So much glare here. The chroniclers did not explain how, but she found to climbed a well again. Far from being glad to see her stepmother banished her to live in the pigsty. Once alone, she opened the casket. Soon she and her muddy quarters glittered with ropes of pearls, jewels, ornaments, garlands, and gold and silver and other treasures. Furiously jealous, the stepsister determined to achieve the same good fortune. Accordingly, she descended the well and found herself in a green meadow. Identical tests awaited her, but she met them in a different mood. When she came to the hedge, instead of heeding to the pleas to pass gently, she shoved her way rudely through it, scattering and breaking the twigs. When she met the cow that needed milk, she drank the milk right up and tossed the pail aside instead of hanging it neatly back on the cow's horns, as her sister had done. And so it was with the sheep. She took the shears from its horns and clipped the wool as it treated, but did not care. But did so carelessly, and she cut toward its skin. The apple tree fared no better in her hands. She ate all the apples that she could easily reach, and then thrashed at the rest so roughly that she broke off whole branches and left the fruit as it lay on the ground. When she reached the farm, she could not at first persuade the witch to engage her, but she graciously refused to be put off, and at last the witch gave in. She was presented with exactly the same task as her sister, but her pride prevented her from heeding the helpful swallows. Irritably, she pelted them with clay stones to drive them away, and so lost any chance she might have in coping with the witch's task. At last, just as to be rid of her, the witch offered her the choice of 3 caskets as wages for her work. The birds again gave their advice, telling her which to choose, but she took not the slightest notice of their kindly intervention, instead governed only by the ignorance of acquisitiveness. She picked out the gaudiest and set off home with it. She had no need to hurry or hide, for the witch was glad to see her go, and knew besides that she carried her punishment with her. When the girl found her way back to the well and home again, she brandished the casket before her mother with a triumphant grin. But once they brought the box into the house and opened it, the avaricious glee turned to horror, for out of the coffer came not the precious gold and silver ornaments they had anticipated, but a loathsome, withering tangle of bats and reptiles. While her stepsister's quarters glistened with gems and treasures, her own chamber was soon beslimed with frog spawn, rodent droppings, and slough off snakeskin. And worse still was the mother and daughter fell to mutual cursing and recriminations. It very soon became apparent that the girl could not open her mouth without a toad or a snake flopping out of it, so that no one, not even her formerly devoted parent, could bear the sight of her any longer. Now, this story kind of reads very similar to a story back in the volume of Wizards and Witches, the first one I did, where you had the young girl who was sent out by her stepmother and who didn't like her out into the forest to retrieve a skull that that can cast a light from Baba Yaga, who given similar task and she eventually came back. So yes, you find very similar stories, just like this one. But there you go. That's the end of it. And hope you all enjoyed this. This is Magical Justice, and you all have a nice day.